Hello again, 10-1s. Welcome back to another discussion about the chapters that we just read from To Kill a Mockingbird. So you guys were tasked with reading chapters 23 to 29 this week, and that only leaves us, oh my goodness, that only leaves us with 2 more chapters to finish next week, chapters 30 and 31. So basically the book is pretty much done. And what we're dealing with these chapters is the fallout from the trial. Okay, so what we're going to do, similar to last week, just working through the chapter questions. That doesn't mean we're answering all of the questions, but rather I'm highlighting the important key issues in each chapter, giving you notes if there are any that are important for you to take. So, chapter 23, let's see. Chapter 23, so previous to that, Bob Ewell threatens to get Atticus, spits in his face. Atticus isn't too worried. All he says in regards to that is, I wish Bob Ewell didn't chew tobacco. So he's not overly worried about the threat that Bob Ewell poses to him at this point. In terms of where the trial is now, so at this point, Atticus and Tom Robinson can still appeal the court's decision, and that's what they're waiting to do. So Tom Robinson, because he's been found guilty, he's being kept in a jailhouse. He's being kept in the Enfield prison farm, it mentions. His family cannot visit him there. He's being surveilled, he's being watched, he's being kept there, but essentially they are waiting their appeal. So they can go to court again and appeal the decision, okay? So hope is not lost at this point for Tom Robinson. We do find out as well in chapter 23 that there was one man in particular who kept the jury longer than normal. So on page 222, Atticus mentions that there was one thing that made me think, well, this may be the shadow of a beginning. That jury took a few hours. An inevitable verdict, maybe, but usually it takes him just a few minutes. This time, he broke off and looked at us. You might like to know that there was one fellow who took considerable wearing down. In the beginning, he was raring for an outright acquittal. Who? Jem was astonished. Atticus's eyes twinkled. It's not for me to say, but I'll tell you this much. He was one of your old Sarum friends. One of the Cunninghams? Jem yelped. I didn't recognize any of them. You're joking. So what Atticus just reveals to Jem and to Scout is the man that essentially was arguing in favor of acquitting Tom Robinson was one of the men who was there that night at the jailhouse, who was there to lynch Tom Robinson. That time when Scout appeals to the humanity of that group, he was one of those men. So he, at one point, was so angry at this case that he was there to lynch Tom Robinson. However, when it came to actually bringing the case to court, he was the man on the jury who kept the jury longer than normal. Okay, so that is significant in that it demonstrates that there is hope for the town, or that the town is at least making baby steps forward. Like Atticus said, normally a jury will take a few minutes. At least for this trial, they did take hours to deliberate. Okay. So then, if we're going to respond to this question, discuss the mockingbird symbol in relation to Tom Robinson, I believe on your copy it says chapter 24 or 25. This is actually, should be for chapter 23, doesn't really matter. The question can apply to the entire novel. So, I'm going to change my color. Discuss the mockingbird symbol in relation to Tom Robinson. So we kind of discussed this a little bit. The mockingbirds represent innocence. They represent those who are defenseless and vulnerable. Those who do nothing to harm anyone. Tom Robinson is, in this case, a mockingbird, in that he did nothing wrong. He was completely innocent. So the symbolism there is pretty straightforward, okay? You should be able to make that connection. Tom Robinson can be likened to a mockingbird in that he was, goodness, in that he was completely innocent of all the charges laid against him. Okay, pretty straightforward connection there. We talked a little bit about Boo being a mockingbird. Jem and Scout we could also liken to mockingbirds in that their innocent perception of the world being black and white, or Jem's perception of the justice or the court system being inherently good. He thought justice would be carried out. He believed that so deeply, and then really his beliefs were completely crushed by this trial. So in that way we could liken Jem to a mockingbird, saying that his innocence is kind of being taken away from him slowly throughout the entirety of this novel. Okay, so that's really all there is to talk about chapter 23. No notes, important quotes, except that what I talked about, that there are positive steps being made in the town, and we see that as one of the Cunninghams fought for Tom Robinson to be acquitted. Acquitted means to be let go, relinquished of all charges. Alright, then we move on to our chapter 24. Ooh, chapter 24 is a good chapter. This is where where Aunt Alexandra has her missionary circle friends over. So on Sunday she has the ladies over for tea and they do their missionary circle, and this is where on page 230 Mrs. Merriweather talks about how distressing the situation is with the Maroonahs which is an African tribe in Africa. And there's one missionary, Dr. J. Grimes Everett, who is the only person who will go near them. That's saintly J. Grimes Everett. And then she goes on and on to talk about the oppression that they're facing, the poverty, the immorality, the darkness, and how important it is that they are fighting over there in Africa to help these people, which obviously is extremely hypocritical when they're not doing the same thing at home in the town of Macomb. Okay, so she goes on to talk about how terrible it is, how the African tribe is living, and how it's their duty to bring Christ to them and introduce them to the Bible and do all these good things. But then she's quick to judge, and she talks about how awful it is that her kitchen cook, Sophie, who's a black woman, was upset after the Tom Robinson trial. So on page 231, she says, well, I always say forgive and forget. Forgive and forget. Thing that church ought to do is help her lead a Christian life for those children from here on out. Some of the men ought to go out there and tell that preacher to encourage her. Excuse me, Miss Merriweather, I interrupted. Are you talking about Mayella Ewell? No, child. That darkie's wife. Tom's wife. Tom Robinson, ma'am. Miss Merriweather turned back to her neighbor. There's one thing I truly believe, Gertrude, she continued, but some people just don't see it my way. If we just let them know we forgive 'em, that we've forgotten it, then this whole thing will blow over. So Miss Merriweather believes that the colored community has done something wrong by trying to prove Tom Robinson innocent. She believes that it's their position to forgive them. And then she keeps going on. Again she turned to me. Miss Merriweather was one of those childless adults who find it necessary to assume a different tone of voice when speaking to children. Nothing, Jean Louise, she said in stately Largo. The cooks and field hands are just dissatisfied, but they're getting settled down now. They grumbled all next day after the trial. Miss Merriweather faced Miss Farrell. Gertrude, I tell you there's nothing more distracting than a sulky darky. Their mouths go down to here. Just ruins your day to have one of 'em in the kitchen. You know what I said to my Sophie, Gertrude? I said, Sophie, I said, you simply are not being a Christian today. Jesus Christ never went around grumbling and complaining. And you know, it did her good. She took her eyes off the floor and said, no, Miss Merriweather, Jesus never went around grumbling. I tell you, Gertrude, you never ought to let an opportunity go by to witness for the Lord. So, the hypocrisy here is just terrible, that she feels as though the colored community has done wrong. She feels as though they have absolutely no reason to be upset. She's going to witness to them by telling them not to be upset due to the Tom Robinson trial. This is just probably one of my favorite scenes in the book because it just reveals how toxic the prejudice attitude is among these women and among Maycomb, so that they have absolutely no self-awareness in which they can pretend to show Christ-like love to an African tribe, but will not show it to the people working in their own homes. So in regards to answering our question, what is ironic about the missionary circle conversation? Everything. So this scene, we'll write, so the fact that they believe it to be of the utmost importance to spread God's love to an African tribe halfway across the world, while continuing to oppress and mistreat, two P's and oppress, is telling of just how little self-awareness is, I don't want to say this, prevalent. Okay. And then, so Mrs. Merriweather goes on to even critique Atticus a little bit, and here we actually see a little bit of a positive side of Aunt Alexandra, and that Aunt Alexandra is fiercely protective of her brother and her family and the Finch's name, but she maintains this composure in front of the ladies. And I love what Scout says at the end of this chapter. I carefully picked up the tray and watched myself walk to Mrs. Merriweather. With my best company manners, I asked her if she would have some more. After all, if Auntie could be a lady at a time like this, so could I. So up until this point, Scout has never seen being a lady as something positive, but this is the chapter where she realizes just how difficult it is to maintain face and your composure in the midst of such hypocrisy and lack of self-awareness and just toxic attitudes. So Scout here is actually for the first time starting to appreciate Aunt Alexandra and understand that while maybe she's not all good, she's not all bad at the same time. Okay, and we do find out what happens to Tom Robinson in this chapter as well. So, rather than waiting for his appeal trial, he loses hope and he tries to escape the prison and he's shot. And what's extremely tragic about this, on page 235, well, the whole situation is tragic, but he was shot 17 times, 17 bullet holes in him. They didn't have to shoot him that much, Cal. I want you to come out with me and help me tell Helen. So now Atticus has to go and break the news to Tom Robinson's wife that her husband has been shot, her children no longer have a father, and it's breaking Atticus apart. It's breaking Aunt Alexandra apart to see her brother have to deal with this as well. Okay, so why did Tom try to escape? Just trying to find the quote that Atticus says. So at the bottom of page 235, Atticus leaned against the refrigerator, pushed up his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. We had such a good chance, he said. I told him what I thought, but I couldn't in truth say that we had more than a good chance. I guess Tom was tired of white men's chances and preferred to take his own. So why did Tom try to escape? Essentially, he lost hope in a system that oppresses people of color. And he decided to take matters into his own hands, or to at least take his own chance, rather than once again placing it in the hands of a white man and having his hopes destroyed. Okay, that's it that I wanted to talk about for chapters 23, 24. Oh, sorry, no, there's one more thing. So in your booklet, there's no questions for chapter 25, but there is an important quote, very important quote, at the end of chapter 25. Oh, sorry, at the very beginning of chapter 25 on page 238. Don't do that, Scout. Set him out on the back steps. Jem, are you crazy? I said, set him out on the back steps. Sighing, I scooped up the small creature, placed him on the bottom step, and went back to my cot. And then they go on and on and on. What Jem is doing here is he's protecting a roly-poly bug from Scout, who was just poking it. Okay, so Jem was scowling. It was probably a part of the stage he was going through, and I wished he would hurry up and get through it. He was certainly never cruel to animals, but I had never known his charity to embrace the insect world. Why couldn't I mash him? I asked. Because they don't bother you, Jem answered in the darkness. He had turned out his reading light. So, this entire page is about a bug. Remember when I said anytime the author goes on and on about something of seemingly little importance, it's usually really important. This is really important. So at this moment, here I'm just giving you some notes for chapter 25 because this would be an important note and quote, something that you would absolutely use in the last paragraph of an essay. Jem at this point in the novel demonstrates, or we'll say is sensitive to the vulnerability of those who are defenseless. In this case, it is an insect. Okay, so Scout wasn't trying to be mean to the bug. She's just withdrawing back into the childhood world where actions don't have abstract significance, and so she moves to crush the bug. Jem, however, who's now sensitive to the vulnerability of those who are oppressed and defenseless, urges her to leave the bug alone. So here we do see a transformation in the boy who once believed that turtles don't have feelings, as he seeks to protect, we'll say, anyone or thing that cannot protect itself. So the reason why this is significant is because we're starting to see in concrete terms how the trial, how all the tragedies and how all the difficult circumstances, forces, adversity, challenges, how they've all now shaped Jem, transformed him into a bit of a different person than he was at the beginning of the novel. Okay, that's it. Those are the important parts of 23, 24, 25. Little recap. Read your next chapters, watch my next video.